Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC Football Podcast. My name is Joey Weaver. I'm a Georgia Tech grad and a Louisville fan. He's Mike McDaniel. He is a Virginia Tech grad and a Notre Dame fan. Mike, first question, what was your favorite massive upset that Pittsburgh pulled this year?
Could it be the one against Miami at the end of the year?
Yeah, that one was pretty good. I was a big fan, too.
Wasn't bad.
That was a fun game to watch, no lie. Kenny Pickett went off in that game. That was a lot of fun. Mike, we're going to recap the 2017 Pitt Panthers season. Things did not go all that great for the Panthers, maybe not quite as well as we thought. Our preseason predictions, I had them at 6-6. You had them at 7-5, and our buddy Jim Hammett also had them at 7-5. He's over at cardiachill.com on the SB Nation Network. They actually finished 5-7, 3-5 in the ACC. They weren't far from crossing that threshold into bowl eligibility, had a couple of tough losses in there. At the last minute. But overall, I mean, kind of a disappointing season for Pittsburgh given what they were just a year ago and how much noise they made on the national stage not so long ago.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Now, it was tough sledding, obviously, just given what their schedule was. Virginia Tech and Miami games. At the end of the year, they had NC State in the middle of the season. They had that opening stretch where they had Penn State and Oklahoma State in back-to-back weeks. I mean, the schedule was absolutely brutal. So, seeing as though they finished 5-7, yes, it's a disappointment. Yes, they wanted to, reach bowl eligibility given how well they played last year. But, at the same time, looking at the schedule the way it was at the beginning of the year, it was safe to say that this is around what we expected, anywhere between the 5-7 win range. And that's exactly where they ended up, as they end up on the low, the low end of that threshold, only winning 5 games. But yeah, just a brutal schedule coupled with inconsistent quarterback play. And I think that was a real telltale sign that, things weren't going to go quite as well as a lot of Pittsburgh fans wanted them to this year.
Yeah, the Panthers drew the short end of the stick, in terms of out-of-conference scheduling, at least in degree, to the point of, I would say this is, if not the toughest, certainly one of the 2 or 3 toughest out-of-conference schedules in the ACC and maybe in the country, with games against Penn State and Oklahoma State, both of whom were top 10 caliber teams. So that was tough. But, I mean, this was a workable schedule otherwise that I think they let a couple of games get away from them. Even what was a rebuilding year, this could have been better for the Panthers. So certainly disappointing that way. Let's talk about their best win, Mike, and I think it's pretty obvious which one that was. That was the 4-7 Panthers knocking off the previously undefeated number 2 Miami Hurricanes 24-14 the day after Thanksgiving. Like I said, a really exciting game, a huge performance from Kenny Pickett. And I think maybe what you might consider that even is a little bit of a culmination of the improvement that we saw from Pitt down the stretch, as they were a significantly better team over the last month of the year than they were to start it all out.
Yeah, finding a quarterback was huge. They had Max Brown, they had Ben DiNucci, finally settled on Kenny Pickett due to injuries and inconsistent quarterback play. And Pickett played pretty well down the stretch. They lose 2 heartbreakers in a row, Pittsburgh did, in the month of November, losing to North Carolina 34-31, losing on a goal line stand to Virginia Tech in Blacksburg 20-14. And then, you culminate it with, putting it all together in a 24-14 victory against the Hurricanes where, let's face it, Pittsburgh was a better team throughout the course of that entire football game. That game was one of those strange late season matchups where, Pittsburgh ran the ball really well. They threw the ball well against a team that, quite honestly, they shouldn't have really been that competitive against. I mean, Miami was clicking it all on all cylinders at that point. So, yeah, they finally put it all together in the last game of the year. They had a couple of heartbreaking losses there as well. But given the way the season went for Pittsburgh, it was kind of a roller coaster ride. And I think that final 3-game stretch was really just kind of a culmination of how the season was in its entirety for Pittsburgh. So a lot of positive things to take away, especially from their last 3 or 4 games. Obviously, coming out strong against Virginia before that final 3-game stretch, as I mentioned. But going 2-2, having a couple of tough losses, but really being competitive there with Kenny Pickett as your starting quarterback, I think will lead you into 2018 with some promise, at least at the quarterback position, which was really a weak part of their offense for much of the season.
Yeah, there were a few teams in the ACC that kind of struggled to develop an identity throughout the year, and Pitt was one of them. But you saw them develop it there towards the end of the year, leaning on Kenny Pickett was really good in his last 2 games. Darren Hall, not the D train, that's A.J. Dillon, but D-Train Jr., maybe, Darren Hall at Pittsburgh, he had some really strong performances there at the end of the year. I think they've got a core of guys now that they can lean on going into 2018. So that was very much a positive, and you saw that all come to fruition again against Miami late in the year. Worst loss, Mike, I think probably came a week before that at the hands of your Virginia Tech Hokies in what had to just be a mind-blowing heartbreaker for Panthers fans everywhere to watch how that game came to a close.
Yeah, it felt like Pittsburgh had control of that football game for much of the game. Virginia Tech was really struggling offensively. Defensively, they hung in tough. Obviously, it was the low-scoring game, 20-14, but Pittsburgh drives all the way down the field. They have the ball in position there inside the Hokies 5-yard line. They're late. Virginia Tech gave up a couple of big plays in the passing game. They're down the stretch, and Pittsburgh had it right at the Hokies' doorstep, and Virginia Tech came up with a goal line stand there, which really ended up costing the Panthers bowl eligibility. You win that game, and you win the following week against Miami like they did, and you're playing in a bowl game. So, it was a season of near misses for Pittsburgh. Hopefully better things are to come in 2018. The consistency at quarterback, I think, is the one thing I'll keep coming back to. But that is the toughest loss of the year, I think, that loss to Virginia Tech, because they were so close. And they were so close the week before against North Carolina, too. So those are backbreaking when you have back-to-back losses, in that manner. So, yeah, tough 2-game stretch that really ended up costing the Panthers bowl eligibility there in November.
Yeah, that was a pretty soul-crushing couple of losses there. Again, at home on a Thursday night against UNC, and then the way that Virginia Tech game unfolded. I remember I was at a wedding that weekend, and I was doing the rehearsal all on Saturday, and I looked down at my phone at one point, saw they had the ball inside the 5 with a minute left, and I was like, oh, man, Pitt's going to steal this one for Virginia Tech. And sadly, they did not. Sorry, Pitt fans, for making you relive that. Mike, let's talk about the coaching staff a little bit. There's one big change that's being made. Defensive coordinator Josh Conklin has been hired by Wofford. It's an FCS program in South Carolina. They're going to have him as their head coach. And in comes Randy Bates, is going to be the defensive coordinator for Pittsburgh moving forward. He was previously the linebackers coach at Northwestern. I have questions about this from a couple of angles. First of all, what made Wofford really want Pitt's defensive coordinator to be their head coach? And second of all, why is Pitt hiring a position coach to be their defensive coordinator? But maybe there's people smarter than me that are making these decisions. I mean, I don't know. What you tell me, Mike? What are we thinking here?
Okay, so I can answer one of those questions. So Josh Conklin, the Pitt defensive coordinator that's leaving for the Wofford job, was a former Wofford assistant. So there was history there, and that's probably why they tapped him to be the next head coach. Now, hopefully they weren't looking at the Pittsburgh Panthers defensive game tape over the last few seasons, because I don't think you want to be hiring Josh Conklin if you took a look at that. The Pittsburgh defense has been terrible since Pat Narduzzi's been there, and they made some strides this season, but yeah, a lot of questions there. Josh Conklin leaves. It could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. It could be, bad defense gets worse, or it could be, you're bringing in Randy Bates from Northwestern, who was a linebackers coach. Northwestern's had a decent defense in the Big Ten, but, he's only been a linebackers coach. So how is he going to handle now being thrown into the mix as a defensive coordinator at Pittsburgh, where expectations are going to be pretty high right off the bat because the defense has been so bad and everybody's expecting a turnaround? So, we'll have to see what kind of hire this is. I mean, from all indications, Randy Bates is a, highly regarded assistant. So him coming in and running the defense under Pat Narduzzi will be different. But it'll be an opportunity now for Pittsburgh to take a step forward heading into 2018, because that's the one area that Pittsburgh has really struggled over the last few years. The issue that the Panthers had this year is that the offense wasn't really all that consistent either. And that's a recipe for being 5-7 versus 8-4, 9-3, or being in that neighborhood where they've been the last few years. So yeah, Pitt's got to get more consistent on the defensive side of the ball. I think they have to find their identity on that side of the ball first and foremost. And then hopefully with Kenny Pickett at quarterback, now you have something there, and there will be an opportunity there for him to grow within the system. Obviously, he was a freshman this year, but moving forward, becoming Pitt's full-time starting quarterback, hopefully the Panthers will have a little bit more stability and consistency on that side of the ball as well. So, could there be improvements in 2018? You would hope so if you're a Pittsburgh fan, just given the tough losses that they had. But the positives are you found a quarterback, and you're going to have a different defensive coordinator, and maybe a fresh voice will really help that unit.
Yeah, I found something. Randy Bates was formerly a defensive coordinator at Louisiana Tech, but that was over 10 years ago, and he's never been a Power 5 defensive coordinator. So interesting hire by Narduzzi. Now, then again, I mean, Pat Narduzzi, a defensive guy himself, maybe he's just going to run the system himself and just needs Bates to call plays and kind of manage stuff during the game. I don't really know how that whole arrangement is going to work. I will say, while we're talking about the coaches, Mike, if it's me and I look at Pat Narduzzi as Pitt's head coach, I start having a lot of questions, and I for his track record so far, I think his seat might be a little warmer than it should be. I don't know that he's always done the greatest job of managing this program and kind of guiding this team through close games and such. They had one really good year on the back of Matt Canada's offense, and other than that, it hasn't really been great at Pittsburgh under Narduzzi. I don't know how much longer Pitt fans, are wanting to give Narduzzi, thinking he might build a program that's really successful over time. We'll see. It was a tough year. They went 5-7. The previous 2 years they were 8-5, but I think very different qualities of 8-5 in those years. So I'm just curious. Do you sense any sense that maybe Narduzzi is on a bit of a hot seat going into 2018, or am I just speculating wildly here?
I don't think you're speculating wildly. I do remember when we had Jim Hammond on, for the season preview back in the late summer. He was talking about how he didn't feel like the criticism of Pat Narduzzi was where it should be among the Pitt fan base. Like, they didn't really criticize Narduzzi. They thought he was such an upgrade as a head coach. They were just kind of expecting, the Pitt program to succeed right away. And it was a lot of excuse making that was happening for the fact that Pitt was an 8-5 program a couple years in a row. Now you're 5-7. So what happens next year if you go 5-7 again? Then are we really talking about Pat Narduzzi being on the hot seat? I'm not sure if he's on the hot seat heading into 2018. I think you and I think he should be, just because the defense has been so bad. And outside the 1 year with Matt Canada that you mentioned, they haven't really been all that consistent on that side of the ball either. So what do you really have if you're Pitt? And look, the ACC Coastal Division, really the last few years, has been wide open. I mean, let's call it what it is. Miami wins it this past year. You had North Carolina in the mix a few years back. Virginia Tech obviously won the Coastal Division in 2016, but that was a team that kind of came out of nowhere. Georgia Tech's been competitive. I mean, there are a lot of teams here in the Coastal Division that have an opportunity to compete. I think Pitt is one of them, just because of the talent that they bring in. And the fact that defensively they do have the athletes to compete at a high level in the Coastal, but they really just haven't lived up to the billing. And I think that says more about the coaching staff than anything else. So I'm not sure if he's on the hot seat or not. I think he should be. At least his seat should be getting a little bit warmer. And maybe it is now that they've gone 5-7 and they didn't have a winning season. But I think there's a lot of criticism, like Jim mentioned in our preseason preview of Pittsburgh, that maybe Narduzzi wasn't receiving, that now he might actually receive or garner now that they went 5-7.
Let's look at 2018, Mike. Pitt bringing back a lot. Again, they bring back Darren Hall and Kenny Pickett, the guys they started leaning on offense down the stretch. They bring back most of their skill position talent. They lose Jester Weah on the outside, but other than that, offensive skill position talent all coming back. Defensively, there is a lot of returning talent here. They have a lot to build on here, and I don't know if that's going to necessarily translate to results. It hasn't always in the past, but plenty of talent coming back for Pitt on both sides of the ball. Another player that they are losing, and we're not all totally sure what went into this decision, but Quadri Henderson leaving after his junior year to go to the NFL feels like a bit of a suspect decision. Don't know that he's a whole lot more than like a return specialist at the next level, but time will tell. The schedule, they've got out-of-conference games, home against Albany, home against Penn State, on the road at UCF, on the road at Notre Dame. Mike, that might be a 1-3 out-of-conference slate. That is not great scheduling if you're Pitt.
Yeah, I mean, at best 2-2, right? I mean, UCF doesn't have Scott Frost anymore, so how good will they be next year? I mean, they still have a lot of talent. Yeah, I mean, at best 2-2, more than likely 1-3. Penn State's going to be really good once again. Notre Dame obviously should be pretty good next season. UCF still has a lot of talent. So if you're Pitt, you better beat Albany, because outside of that, your wins really are just going to come in conference play. And to be honest, I mean, they do play in the easier of the two divisions. They get a favorable draw out of the Atlantic. They only play Syracuse and Wake Forest, so you don't get a bunch of heavy hitters in the Atlantic Division. You don't draw a Clemson or a Florida State or a Louisville. Who knows what Louisville will be next year, but you're not drawing those types of teams coming out of the Atlantic. So, I mean, Pitt's wins, I think, are coming in conference play. I think they're going to have to if they want to reach bowl eligibility because, like you mentioned, this non-conference schedule is brutal and 2 road games that are pretty tough. I mean, you're lucky you get Penn State coming to Heinz Field. You don't have to go play them in Happy Valley again, but you have to go on the road to UCF and then on the road to Notre Dame in mid-October, which is not an easy place to play. So, yeah, tough schedule for Pitt. We'll have to see what happens in conference play. I think that's where they're going to garner most of their wins.
Hey, credit to Pitt, too, for making a difficult schedule. It'll make for some exciting games to watch, and it will engage the fan base, but also just be prepared to just, lose a bunch of games, too. Mike, overall, better or worse? I think 2018 will be better. I don't know how much better it'll be. I think, the 6-6, 7-5 that we were predicting before this year is maybe what they're looking at next year, especially if we're just assuming that they're going to go, 2-2 at best out of conference. I don't see them losing less than 2 or 3 ACC games. So I think 7-5 might be around your ceiling as a Pitt fan next year.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they are until we see great improvement on either side of the football, which I think you and I have been expecting, but we haven't really seen yet. So I think it starts with defense just because the bar has been set so low by the defensive units over the past few years that they really need to improve on that side of the ball first before I take them seriously as a football team overall over the course of an entire season. Offensively, I think they're creative enough. They'll manufacture enough points, but defensively, they need to get stops against some of the better teams in the ACC. And until they do that, I think they're a 5 to 7 win program. I think that's what they are.
I think so. So not great in 2017, should be better in 2018, although we're not talking about a national title team in 2018, so better is relative. Mike, anything else on Pittsburgh?
No, I think we're all set.
Cool. We got better teams. We do have better teams. We also have other teams to recap here. In the meantime, they can find us on Twitter. I'm at FTRS Joey. He is at Mike McDaniel ACC, and together we're at BC Podcast ACC. Y'all can send us an email to the longest email address known to man, basketballconferencepodcast@gmail.com.
Nailed it, buddy.
It was a little rocky there for a second, but we got there. Y'all can find us on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, the Overcast app, and wherever fine podcasts are sold for free. You can find us on YouTube. Go search us on there, Basketball Conference Podcast on YouTube, and we will have our podcast posted there in video format as well if you ever decide you want to look at our ugly mugs. Mike, where else can they find us on the social medias?
Facebook.com/basketballconference. Rate, review, find all of our podcasts there.
Please do that. We appreciate you all hitting us up on Facebook and YouTube and all those other places. Hit the subscribe button. We try to provide the content to the people. Mike, anything else before we get out of here?
I think we're all set, man.
Let's talk about some other teams. Until then, for Mr. Mike McDaniel, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. And until then, go ACC.